Hello and welcome to SBK Unplugged, Sheldon Bosley Knight's land and property podcast. My name's Kate Gould and I'm the host of the show. Today in the studio, I'm joined by Matt Burrows, who's our Associate Director and who heads up the auction department as our auctioneer. Before we start, I would like to say thank you very much again to Mill Street for hosting us in their amazing studio. Thank you very much, guys. So, Matt, welcome to the studio. It's lovely to have you here. Talking all things auctions. Obviously, Sheldon Bosley Knight started, really, that's where we started with auctions and land sales. Yeah. And obviously the department, the business has grown since then. So I would like to find out a bit more about you and your team, what you guys do on a day-to-day basis, what it's like being an auctioneer. I presume it's a bit more than wielding the gavel, but also the processes involved and perhaps a bit of myth-busting. I'm sure there's a lot of elements within auctions itself that perhaps people don't know about or have a misconception about. But it'd be nice to know about your success stories, because I know there are many. And then perhaps a bit about market trends, what you feel might happen this year, if there's any, I don't know whether it's legislation or whether the department's growing, if you could talk to us about that. But first of all, I thought it'd be really nice to find out a bit more about you, how you got into land and property and what it was about being an auctioneer that made you think, yes, that's the job for me. So tell me about it.
Brilliant. No, so I come from quite an unusual background in property. I left university and joined the army, then very promptly got injured.
Oh no.
So that
was unfortunate.
Yeah, I got some wonderful scars on my legs. The transition from military life into civilian life happened during the credit crunch. So I had no idea as a 20-something-year-old where I wanted to have my career. And in all honesty, I saw an advert for a trainee management estate agent. Instantly dismissed it because he wants to be an estate agent. Then something on the advert made me click onto it to get a bit more detail, and it said it came with a BMW company car.
Nice.
And I remember so clearly looking out to the car park and seeing my Vauxhall Astra, nothing wrong with Astras, but comparing in my head Astra versus BMW and instantly reevaluating whether estate agency would be quite so bad. Started my career as an estate agent, worked my way up to branch manager at a corporate agency before moving to a large independent. And it was then, after a few years in that business, that the owner of that business tapped me on the shoulder and said, we would like to train you up to work in the auction department.
Amazing.
I had zero experience in property auctions, had never been to one. So I spent the next year really travelling around the region, visiting lots of auction companies just to see what it's all about. Undertook some training with NAVA, the National Auctioneers and Valuers Association, part of Property Mark, so I could become a professionally qualified auctioneer. Then went on the rostrum and led the department as well as a number of other roles within that business, and that was my first throws into agency, and into auctioneering.
And so, how did you get involved with Sheldon Bosley Knight? What drew you to us?
Well, I was working as a business consultant in 2022, and I was approached by James Mawson, who's a sales director, and James and I worked together at a previous company. He shared a vision that the owners and the custodians had around introducing auctions into Sheldon Bosley Knight. So I presented to Mike and Dan 3 options into how they could introduce auctions, whether it's partnering with a larger company to white label an auction proposition, having a hybrid approach where we would use maybe some software, but predominantly it was another company who'd be involved, or whether we did it all ourselves and really offered something that was quite difficult to replicate. And that very much being the mantra of Sheldon Bosley Knight. They chose the latter option and brought me on board to head the department, and we built it from scratch. Yeah. So on day one, there was me. I think we had 6 lots in the first auction, and I had 2 months to get it ready.
Oh my goodness! And at that point, we were hosting at Chipping Norton,
yes.
But we are now in Stratford, and you're just about to launch in Hinckley as well. So. Yeah. Amazing success, and you've not done it single-handedly. Tell me about the team and how you've done it, really.
Yeah, well, the when we first started the department, it was quite clear early on that we'd need to bring a team in, and really it's the auction team who are the absolute heart and soul of the department. We've got two phenomenal property professionals in Will Glendenning and Jessica Lewis. Jess does all of the auction valuing, so she will go on site, meet with clients, provide the right advice, and Will is really looking after everything to do with buyers and bidders. And some of the feedback we've had from both Will and Jess have been phenomenal. Jess has been with us since January, Will since last June, and some of the reviews we've had for Will have been really quite inspiring, both from buyers and sellers, because Will's main job is to introduce auction to buyers in a way that isn't terrifying.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things with auction, is that it's a very different process to buying through the open market. But once you scratch under the surface, it's an incredibly simple process that has huge benefits to buyers and sellers. We established the team initially back in January 23, really with borrowing staff on a part-time basis from other departments when there was free workload. And Will was the first new member of staff. And we've got a new member of staff who's joining us in early April, Samantha, who's going to be spearheading our newest growth area, which is opening up a second venue up in Leicestershire. And she's going to be looking after that auction from the valuing side.
And so do you need qualifications at all to be a negotiator or a valuer within the auction department? How does it work?
At the moment with UK legislation, there's nothing that requires formal qualification, but there is legislation that's snail pacing its way through Parliament called ROPA, Regulation of Property Agents, which will, if passed and gaining royal assent, will put a requirement for every estate agent and property professional to have qualifications. Certainly with my department, I've insisted that all members of staff are training towards obtaining a qualification, which will be a technical award, level 3 in real property auctioneering, which I obtained, which means that I'm a member of NAVA, National Auctioneer and Valuers Association. On a personal level, I'm in the middle of going through my membership of the RICS, Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and hopefully by the end of this year I'll be a chartered surveyor. Not in building surveying. I won't be able to do red book valuations or anything like that. But it will be much more to have a professional competency, ensuring that the team, the department is governed by the regulations of the RICS.
Right. So being an auctioneer, you have a position of sort of authority, standing up there on the rostrum. But what is it really like? It's not just saying going, gone with and hitting the gavel on the lectern. What do you have to, there's obviously much more to it than that.
Well, with every auction, a common thought process really for people within the industry and also our clients and customers is that my entire working life revolves around 12 evenings per year, where I do the rostrum work. The reality is that for every auction, we've been marketing those properties and those lots for easily 6 weeks. We'll have been preparing some of those lots, in some cases up to 6 months previously, to get everything ready for the auction. So if we look at, for every single auction, we really start the coalface work for each auction about 3 to 4 months before the night of the auction, which will be involving conducting market appraisals on properties, meeting clients. A common consideration that we have with auction is that it's very new to a lot of people. Some people and some of our clients have sold at auction before, so they understand the process. But a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever really explored an auction beyond what you see in Homes Under the Hammer.
Yeah.
A big consideration we have is that the public perception really does revolve around Homes Under the Hammer. And for those properties that appear on that programme, they're all 2 to 3 bed freehold properties in a very poor state of repair. And if you actually look at the programme, they spend maybe a couple of minutes on the auction. They only focus on the bidders and the auctioneer. There's no interviews with the sellers and why they're selling. They'll then meet the new buyers at the property and do a before, during and after pieced a camera around what it all looks like. So really, it's not a program about auctions. It's a program about house redevelopment and property redevelopment. Now, if we have our clients that have a 2 to 3 bedroom, freehold property in very poor state of repair, they will instantly think, well, maybe auction's right for me. I'd say 90% of our lots do not fit that bill. We sell a lot of land, a lot of commercial property, residential property in every state of repair, from completely fire damaged up to A1 condition. Really, the common factor that brings everything together is the sellers themselves. But about my role as an auctioneer, in the rostrum itself, or on the rostrum itself, you're right, the auctioneer has a lot of authority. When I first looked at what I'm able to do and what my responsibilities are when I first got into auctioneering, I was staggered to see just how much the running of the auction is down to the auctioneer's discretion. Everything from, we can refuse bids without having to give a reason if it's in our client's interests. We can bid on behalf of our clients, not over the reserve price, which stops some sellers maybe bidding on their own properties and not knowing when to put their hands down. And we can regulate the bidding. So we can choose by what increments we follow and how we actually obtain bids, whether it's online, over the phone, or from people and bidders in the room itself.
Yeah, and you must have very good eyesight as well, because I've been to some of the auctions and literally you can barely see the paddle, isn't it? That's what they're called, raising or not being raised, and yet a bid has somehow happened. So, I mean, that must be also a factor, that you need to have eyes everywhere.
You do get a second nature to it, and you can see a twitch or a movement. But on the last auction, I was completely caught out, and I was in the middle of finalising a sale. And we, at the front of the rostrum, we have 2 other members of staff whose job it is to spot. So they're not considering the bidding; they're just eagle eye out there to see. And on the last auction, it was for the first time, second time, third and final time, and I heard from my ear, "Oh, there's a bid in the corner."
Gosh, yeah.
So we stopped just in time, and it was a new bidder, came in at the very end of the bidding, and they ended up winning the lot.
Yeah, amazing.
So it is important to have processes in place to make sure we can capture everybody wanting to bid.
But it's also quite exciting. I mean, there was an auction we did last year in Stratford where there were 2 very competitive bidders over a lot, and it just went on and it was so exciting. So that must also be, it must be amazing to stand there and be part of something that actually can be very exciting.
Absolutely. And if we think of the same lot, this lot was 60 acres of agricultural land. We had a guide price of 675,000. We felt in the department it would probably sell for 800 to 850. Most of the mood music we were getting from buyers pre-auction was around the 850 mark. And a big part of my job, as I mentioned earlier, is regulating the bidding. So I'm considering, that value lot, do we go in 10, 15,000 bidding increments? And we were going up in £10,000, and the bidding was really between 2 people. And it broke past the 850 mark. And then it broke past the 900, and then the 950. And then it broke past the £1 million mark, and it just kept on going. And we ended up selling for 1.3 million, which was almost double the guide price, 450,000 above the expected sale price. And for us, it was fantastic. Our client was delighted. The buyer was delighted. The only headache it gave was to Jimmy Morton, our rural director, because then he had all of the agricultural community and the rural community now realising, they got £21,666 per acre. Is my field worth it? So it was a nice headache to have.
Which brings me on to my next question, because we do, so the auction, you do land and property, but you make a decision, don't you, on whether an auction is the right vehicle to sell. And some people may not think that their land or property is the right thing to sell it either on the open market or the. So how do you discuss with potential sellers, and do they come to you? Do you go to them? Are they referred from our sales department or our land, the rural department? And I suppose explain the process by which those sellers come to you and say, please, can you help me?
Yeah, well, I suppose looking at the first inquiry that we get, we'll get inquiries direct. So these will be people who contact the auction department, maybe you've seen an advert or the website, and ask us to go round and provide advice. A lot of introductions we have will be from the departments. So that might be from one of our sales departments, the rural department or the commercial department, planning, land and new homes, strategic land, really every side of the business we have had introductions from. First thing we'll do is contact the client and just have an initial conversation over the phone. That will be either with myself or one of my two valuers. We'll go through the basics about what it is they're selling, just so we know how we can help. So we'll be looking at the type of land, the type of property. If it's land, is it agricultural? Is it planning permission or potential for planning permission? If it's commercial, is it tenanted? Is it vacant? Are there considerations? If it's a freehold property or leasehold property, we'll just look at basically what it is we're going out to. We'll then arrange a meeting and go through a full appraisal. Now, when I was an estate agent, an appraisal really focused on price and what we can offer as a business. With an auction, it's that, but mainly focusing on, well, let's discuss what an auction's all about. So we'll go through the process of an auction from very start to very finish, and we'll look at the similarities and the differences in an auction compared to an open market sale. The sorts of clients that we mainly deal with are looking for a number of factors where the open market either can't help what they want or isn't perfectly suited. So quite often we're dealing with lots that will gain huge amounts of competition. So the sort of property or the sort of parcel of land where we know there'll be 20 or 30 people wanting to get their hands on it. Or it's for people and sellers who require transparency. So these are often trustees, executors, beneficiaries, or people who have a lasting power of attorney, where they need to be able to demonstrate that there's been transparency in the process. Now, sale on the open market, it has many great features. One of the downsides to it is all done behind closed doors. So if you're a trustee or a beneficiary, it's difficult to demonstrate that you haven't sold it to its best price, whereas an auction can do that. Then we're dealing with sellers who really demand speed in their sale. An open market sale can drag on for months and months and months once a buyer is found, and the seller loses a lot of the control in how long that process will take. With an auction, we list a property and we'll be exchanging contracts 6 weeks later on the night of the auction. The fall of the hammer is actually the exchange of contracts, and completion is 4 weeks later. So the seller is able to tightly control the speed of the sale. And the final area where we can help will be around the security. So some properties and some sellers are very nervous about there might be a negative factor about the property, something that isn't an issue when people first see it, but once they go through their due diligence, they get nervous and withdraw from the sale. With an auction, we put warts and all of the property out for everybody to see. So we disclose any issues, we disclose any known problems, and there's a full legal pack available for people to inspect. And once the hammer falls, the buyers are now legally committed. So for sellers that are very nervous about security, often an auction is the best way to approach that. So during the appraisal, we'll be considering all of these factors and understanding for the customer we're now speaking with, what are their concerns? How can we help this particular client? Everything we do is about how can we help clients. And we'll give advice based on what they want, what we can offer, and whether the two marry up. If the two marry up, we'll recommend auction as a route of sale, discuss a pricing strategy with the client, agree fees, and look at preparing the marketing for the next auction.
So it's quite an involved process, but it seems to be one that is going to be good for some people, perhaps not others.
Absolutely.
But you've had some great successes. And I think if you've explained it all to them, people know then what they're about. And I suppose for some people, the speed element is possibly a big consideration.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can think of a couple of sellers we've helped over the last year where if they had gone on the open market, they would now be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
They would be up a proverbial creek without a paddle. We had one seller who, very sad story, her mum lived in the property. It was her childhood home. Mum had gone into care home and needed quite considerable amounts of care. And she was faced with a dilemma where there was a local authority care home available, but she wanted the best for her mum. As I'm sure, I know I would, I'm sure everybody would. She wanted her mum to have the best. It was going to cost her $1,750 per week in care home fees. Now, the care home did give her a 16-week period of time before the first invoice was due, but 16 weeks is under 4 months. It's not a huge amount of time to go from listing a property to completing. Now, the estate agent in me says, well, we could do that. I'm sure we could get that pushed through. But the problem is there's no control.
Yeah.
You're in the laps of the buyers and hoping that they do what they said they were going to do. And everything's based on trust. Whereas with an auction, we were able to give really good advice to her. We were able to appraise the property for auction, explain the process. It solved the problem. In terms of the auction date was in time. In fact, it gave her about a month's spare time to get everything finalised. Now, this particular property we knew would also attract a lot of competition. The sort of property that never comes on the market. I think there was a row of 10 or so houses down this little row, and they never come up. So we knew there was going to be a lot of competition. We sold this property successfully and actually achieved a little bit more than the open market would have suggested. So the seller sold for a really good price, achieved her aim, and the feedback we got was, I now have sold knowing that we've got money in 4 weeks to Mom's care home, and a bit of leftover as well. And from her perspective, every pound, or every 10, 20, 30,000 pounds was an extra few weeks, an extra few months for a mum.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, our only focus there was how can we help our client here raise money for a mum's care home.
Yeah.
And an open market sale might have worked, but the danger is there was no control from either the agent or the seller in the process. Yeah.
And so the auction worked especially well because you've got the speed, you've got the transparency, and you've got everything. Yeah. So amazing. So with all that in mind, is auction or selling by auction, is it a growing business at the moment? You said, that your team is expanding, and we've got auctions now happening in Hinckley as well as in Stratford. So does that mean that selling by auction has become more and more popular?
What we're certainly finding is that the growth of auction around the UK has been year-on-year growth really over the last 10 to 15 years. There's a growing public perception around selling by auction, and there's a growing appetite for people who are wanting a route of sale that they might not have considered. The big dilemma we have as auctioneers is that whenever a seller thinks about putting the house on the market, they go with what they know.
Yeah.
I've always bought and sold through an estate agent, so why wouldn't I approach an estate agent to sell this next property? Which is fine if you're an owner-occupier, if you're living in the property, and there aren't any considerations other than, I want something bigger, something smaller, different location. For the sort of customers we're dealing with, they don't fit that mould. So we're entertaining a new concept for them. And certainly what we're seeing internally within Sheldon Bosley Knight is that there's a huge appetite there for selling by auction. Our number of appraisals are growing really month on month, which is why we've opened up the second venue to the north of our patch in Hinckley, to really cover our offices in Leicestershire, in North Warwickshire, where it's a bit of a stretch to get down to Stratford upon Avon. So it was done so in a way to make sure we've got a local venue to our clients in the north of the patch, but also we needed to increase our capacity. And by doubling the amount of auctions we're doing means that we can be very productive in how we operate. Still deliver an excellent level of service, but not have to employ double the number of people, which would obviously have an impact on fees, things of that nature.
So do you touched on the processes of the auction and the sort of whether it's the right vehicle or not, but people still have a bit of a negative view. So tell them how they should reverse that view and think of auctions in a more positive way. Why do people think of it as negative? Is it that they just see those rundown houses on Homes Under a Hammer, or
I think the general misconceptions around auction are that it's only for tired, rundown properties, only for properties that have problems. It's the sort of process where, well, we can't sell it on the open market, so we have to sell it by auction. Or we've tried it on the open market, it hasn't worked, so therefore we'll sell it by auction. The reality is that there are 3 different routes of sale that agents have got to choose from, and sellers have got to choose from. Private treaty, which is a sale on the normal open market. Tender's normally what local authorities do. So they will say, look, we're disposing a former leisure centre, we're inviting offers this time, this date, and it's a sealed bids environment, but it's inviting people to tender for the bid, or a sale by auction. Each of those 3 routes will attract different types of clients. Some of the common misconceptions we get is that I will only sell it for a massively reduced price. It's only going to go to investors and developers. The reality is that some of our auction lots achieve more than they would have done on the open market, and we've got numerous examples of where that's happened. Some achieve the exact same price, or within a couple of % of them. Some do sell for less. But on the same vein, some sales on the open market achieve more than they thought they would achieve the same, or achieve less. The difference is, when we're giving advice, we encourage sellers to think about where do they want to control the risk. With an auction sale, they're controlling how quickly the process works and how secure that buyer is in place. With an open market traditional sale, they're tightly controlling the price, but they lose all control on the speed and security. So I was speaking yesterday with one of our corporate clients. They have had advice for their property in the region of around 600,000. When I spoke to them about auction and said, look, we're actually launching our next auction on the 10th of April. We'll be selling all of those lots under the hammer on the 22nd of May. The money will be in your bank account by early June. His eyes went, well, how is that even possible? We need a sale by the end of July. So by early June, that's brilliant. And his concern was, by launching on the open market, can he have any confidence to his board that this asset will be disposed of by July? And he can't. But with auction, he can. And they've chosen to go on an auction sale because of the fixed timescales. It's also a public company, so they need to demonstrate transparency. So they need to demonstrate that it's being an open bidding environment, that it's transparent, it's recorded. So anybody, if they were ever called on to say, well, hold on a minute, was there any underhand dealing there? Well, no. It's a public auction, and the auctioneer sold to the highest bidder who was prepared to pay on the night.
And I suppose by the same token, we need to talk about buyers as well, because I suppose that if you're watching Homes Under the Hammer, you think, oh, I might go down and snap up a bargain. But you've just illustrated that actually a lot of the lots do sell for way more than the guide price or the reserve price. And that's something else I need you to explain, the difference between the guide and the reserve. But surely for some buyers, they might, who perhaps don't know the ropes, if you like, they might think, oh, well, I'm going to get a bargain. And that's absolutely not necessarily going to be the case, is it?
Yeah, well, what we tend to find from auction buyers is that they are a myriad of different backgrounds. Some of them are first-time buyers. Some of them have sold and moved into rented and are now no downward change. Some are buying a second home, buy-to-let. Some are investors and developers. Predominantly, though, they're all people who are immediately proceedable. So they don't have a property to sell that they're reliant on to pursue their purchase. Some buyers do get a great deal. There's no doubt about it. There's some buyers that do get a great deal. The majority of sales sell for the market value. So what do we mean by the market value? The market value really is the price at which a buyer is prepared to pay. And ultimately, any property sold in the UK is only worth what a buyer is prepared to pay. With an auction, and it's important to realise that the reason why charities and trustees are very keen on selling by auction is because we can demonstrate that we've achieved the best price on the night. Because it was sold in a public environment, anybody who's ready, willing and able can place a bid. From a buyer's perspective, there are a number of buyers who buy almost exclusively at auction because from their perspective, they know they're paying a fair price. Even if that price was higher than they initially expected, they have the option to simply say, actually, that's too much for me now. And they can make that decision simply not to raise their hand, not to make a new bid. But when they win the lot and they do succeed, they know that they paid a fraction above what the next person was prepared to pay.
Yeah.
So they haven't overpaid for it. Whereas there's been a trend over the last decade or so to have more and more really competitive properties being sold by sealed bids or a best and final offer. And the danger here is the winning buyer doesn't know if they've won that by £50 or £50,000.
Yeah.
And I've known some sealed bids that there has been a difference between the two parties of up to 50 grand.
My goodness.
The danger there is they haven't actually committed to the sale. They've agreed a sale subject to contract. They've got a few months to really think long and hard about this. Whereas with an auction, they know that they're prepared to pay 270. The previous people were prepared to pay 269, 500. So they know they've got fair market value for it. And from the buyer's perspective, as soon as that hammer goes, they know there is no chance of the seller changing their mind, another buyer coming in and gazumping them, and they know they'll get those keys in 4 weeks' time, plus any bank holidays.
Yeah.
So it's a very quick and transparent process for buyers, which is why when we review people who have not won at auction, ultimately they know that they had every opportunity.
Yeah.
And they don't feel misled. They don't feel like they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. They know that it's been sold and the client's been looked after, but their rights and their consumer rights have been protected.
And presumably security for them as well. So they know that they're secure in that transaction. So
that's just it.
So both parties are then locked in and it's going ahead. There's no chance of it sort of falling through.
Absolutely. And no matter what type of buyer you are, if you're in an immediately proceedable position, you've got the choice with an open market sale, knowing it could take 5-6 months.
Yeah.
You could be stuck in a chain. You might have to pay another 6 months worth of rental income or live with mum and dad for another few months. Or I've been in that boat before. Whereas with an auction, you know that as soon as the hammer falls, in 4 weeks' time, you're getting your hands on those keys. So if you're a first-time buyer, you don't have to wait for ages. If you're an investor or developer, you don't have to wait huge amounts of time to start earning return on your investment or start that project or start that redevelopment. If you're downsizing, you don't have to wait for months and months and months then to get into the property that you're wanting. So it works incredibly well for buyers and sellers who are in the right vicinity.
Yeah.
It doesn't work incredibly well for buyers with a mortgage. I'd say that's in the minority, but there's a huge amount of short-term lending options or auction-specific finance. And we work very closely with a company that specialises in auction finance to help people who maybe want to get longer-term mortgages, but want a short-term lending option, a solution for them to help them buy at auction. Obviously, we can't give financial advice, but that's why we work with professionals who can.
Yeah. Excellent. And just quickly, tell me about the difference between guide and reserve price, because I think that probably is a bit of a conundrum for most people who don't know the system.
So guide price and reserve price will be a very, very, very similar figure. So gone of the days of having a huge differential between the two prices. The reserve price is where we focus our attention with sellers. So this is a price below which I'm not authorised to sell for.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for sake of argument, we're appraising a property and we agree with the seller that their lowest acceptable price is £200,000. When I'm in the middle of an auction and the bidding reaches 200,000 and goes above that level, my language in the auction will subtly change. I will inform the public that we are selling this property this evening.
Mm.
So in other words, we have now reached the reserve. This is your last chance.
Yeah.
If you want to buy this property, please raise your hand. Otherwise, you will lose it. If the bidding doesn't reach the 200,000, then I don't have authority to sell.
Yeah.
So if the bidding got to 199,500 and nobody else bid, I have to withdraw that lot from the auction. Mm-hmm. So the reserve price is a confidential price between seller and auctioneer, which indicates the seller's lowest acceptable sale price. Now, in order to guide buyers as to roughly where that price is, we go to market with a guide price. And the guide price must have a reflection. It must be real.
Yeah.
So we couldn't have a reserve of 200 and a guide price of 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be very close to that figure, if not at the same level.
Right.
So the guide price is an indication of the seller's lowest acceptable sale price.
Mm-hmm.
There can be a slight difference between, but no more than a few percent.
Right. Okay. So that's very so everybody knows when they see the property or the piece of land that's for sale.
Absolutely. And this is why it's so important when buying or selling through an auction company to make sure that that auction company is regulated by the RICS.
Yeah.
So the RICS produce guidance notes that most auctioneers should follow. Because we as a business are regulated by RICS, and I'm going down the route of becoming a member of the RICS, that guidance becomes a professional statement, which means that we are bound to those guidelines. And part of those guidelines require us as auctioneers to make sure that our guide prices and reserve prices bear relevance to one another. And, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I haven't sat in the gallery of some auctions. I remember one so clearly. It was only a couple of years ago, so it wasn't in the distant past. But there was a property that was offered for £325,000. And the bidding was ferocious. Went up to 350, 370. I think it got up to 412, 413,000. And I was thinking, okay, what's next? Yeah, they've sold that. Oh, great job, done really well there. And the auctioneer said, I say 413 for the first time, second time, third and final time, no more bids. I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to have to withdraw this lot. We haven't quite reached our reserve.
Oh my goodness.
And the whole room was audibly shocked, aghast, and you could see some people very angry. Now, from the buyer's perspective, they've been completely misled. They've potentially invested thousands of pounds in solicitors' fees, let alone wasted time. And the auctioneer simply didn't follow the guidance. In the same way that not all estate agents are the same, not all auctioneers are the same.
Yeah.
But that's why we follow the guidelines to the letter.
Yeah.
To make sure we're not misleading people and not doing things we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. Okay. And auctions seem to be quite quick as well. You don't hang around, do you? So, apart from when the bidding, there is a lot of bidding, it's quite quick as well, isn't it? Which was a surprise for me.
Yeah, it was for me, to be honest. I remember going to my first ever auction and there were 30 lots, and I said to my boss, "Oh, I'll be here all afternoon," and he sort of looked at me and went, "Okay, call me when you're finished." An hour and a half later, it was all done.
Yeah.
Each lot can be wrapped up in a few minutes.
Yeah.
The reality is that if we've got, it all really depends on how quickly the buyer or the bidder makes a decision. Some bidders will come in knowing that's my ceiling and I'll bid up until that level. Others really make a decision on the fly.
Yeah.
So we have some lots that there's, say, two bidders and one is really taking their time making a decision. Absolutely right. They have that time, the ability to make that informed decision. My job as an auctioneer really is to keep the momentum going and to keep encouraging people to bid. Obviously, it's in their own free will if they choose to. But there was one funny moment in the last auction where it was a very tightly run race between two buyers, one on the phone, one in the room. And this bidding started at 200,000, and we got up to 240, and I thought we were done. My first shake of the head, which normally indicates, okay, we're nearly there. So I'd reduced the bidding increment to £500. We do this we're working for our clients. So we want to make sure that, it's only £500. Another one more bid won't hurt you. And he put his hand up, and then we got up to 250 and then 260. And at 265, the chap in the front looks at me square in the eye, just audibly enough for me to hear. And he said, "I'm getting far too old for this." And then he put his hand up again, and then we topped out at 269.5. But that buyer was absolutely delighted. They were prepared to pay up to 300, and ultimately the other bidder dropped out at 269.5, and that's why it was sold at that level.
So what happens though if something doesn't quite reach its reserve price? Do you then talk to the buyers in the room to see whether a deal can be done, or is that not the way things go?
Absolutely. Well, another common misconception with auction is that it only happens on the night. The reality is we launch all of our properties for sale 6 weeks before the auction. So it can be that a buyer 3 weeks in says, actually, this is my dream house. I know you're asking 200, but I'm prepared to offer 250. And our clients have the option and the right to accept a pre-auction offer if they wish. And our job as auctioneers is to help guide them through the volume of interest, our advice as to whether this should be acceptable or considered. And we can exchange contracts 3 weeks before an auction if it's in the seller's best interest and those are their instructions. Similarly, any lot sold on the night, it's the hammer that falls. If a lot doesn't quite reach the reserve, my team will identify the people in the room who are bidding and encourage them to go to the unsold lots part of the auction venue, where I'll normally go straight after the auction, say, right, okay, we didn't sell a couple of lots. Who's here for lot 3? And a couple of people put their hands up. Right, okay, Will, if you have a chat to this person and I'll have a chat to that person, and we'll effectively ask them, look, didn't reach reserve, what's your best and final offer? And if their best and final offer is above the reserve, we'll say, okay, was there anybody else here to bid for lot 3? If nobody else says, yes, I'm prepared to bid, we've got a bid above the reserve, we can still sell immediately, as if it was sold in the room. We've had it before where 2 or 3 people, for whatever reason, didn't bid in the actual auction and then put their bids in after the auction. Okay.
Bit curious.
So we should say, okay, so we had a bid above the reserve and then looked over at my colleagues and, well, I've got a bid over reserve and so have I. So, right, stop this nonsense. Come back in the venue, right, you sit there, you sit there, you sit there. You told me you'd bid 250. Who's got 251? And 250. So we have another mini auction. And this is why a question you asked earlier, how much authority does an auctioneer have? The reason we have a lot of authority on the night is to enable us to make decisions like that if they're in our client's interests. And if they're not in our client's interests, we can simply say, actually, no, I'm going to stop this now. And on some occasions, we'll say, well, look, we'll speak to you in the morning and let's sit in slow time, go through it. Ultimately, it's down to my experience and understanding of the various legislations we work around, or not work around, but work in to make sure we can act in our client's best interests.
And if you're not able to get to the auction on the night, there is an option for proxy bidding and also somebody on the phone. So one of the team will be able to take a bid on the phone. Yeah,
we now offer 4 different ways in which people can engage with the auction if you're a buyer. I'd say still the most popular route is coming to the venue. So you'll drive down, register to bid, read through the legal pack and participate live in the auction, raise your hand in time with the auction. Some people aren't able to make it to the venue, so we need to offer remote bidding. The second most popular way of bidding is online bidding. So I have a camcorder that points me, I'm mic'd up, and people can look at the live stream. If they register to bid online beforehand, you can't just log in and go, oh, I'll place a bid. We go through all of our due diligence checks. but people can bid online. So they'll be seeing the live stream. Will be operating a console, and he'll be telling people on the computer, yeah, we're now asking 250. People can click a button and bid 250. Flashes up on my screen just in front of me. Or I have a bid online from a Mr. C at 250, and we can take that online bid. If people maybe aren't as tech savvy as they'd like to be, then we can offer telephone bidding, which is simply, again, register in advance, and a member of our team will call them before the auction, establish communication, and take their bid over the phone. We also offer bidding by proxy, and bidding by proxy is quite interesting because it's where the buyer will tell the auction department, look, I want to bid at lot number 3, and I'm prepared to pay a maximum of 250,000. I don't see the bid as an auctioneer. I just know we have a proxy bid for lot 3, and somebody else in the team will give the instructions to another member of the team who will bid on that person's behalf.
Right.
But they will bid in line with the bidding. So that might start at 200. Yep, I can bid at 200. And 205. Yeah, I can bid there. 210, and I can bid there. No one else bids sold to 210, even though they're prepared to pay up to 250.
Mm-hmm.
If the bidding goes above 250, then they're out. So we had a buyer who was very keen on a lot. This was last year, and they were transatlantic on a plane.
What, at the actual time? Oh my goodness.
I think they flew off. I think they jetted off about 4 p.m. So I said, look, I'd love to, but I'll be somewhere over Greenland or wherever. So they bid by proxy, and they ended up winning the lot. So we couldn't even tell them they'd won it for a few hours afterwards.
Oh, amazing. That must have been a really nice landing present for them.
We sent them an email saying, congratulations. I think their maximum was about the 320 mark, and they won it for 300.
Oh, amazing. Oh, what a nice story to end on. Well, Matt, thank you so much for having a chat today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed our little chat. And join me again on the next podcast. Thank you very much.